The spring mud clung to my worn boots like shame as I stood before the courthouse steps, clutching the crumpled notice in my trembling fingers. The paper bore the seal of Adams County and words that might as well have been my death warrant. Final notice, property auction, Whitlow Farm, April 15th, 1887. 3 days. I had 3 days before everything my late husband had built, everything that remained of our life together, would be sold to satisfy debts I couldn't begin to comprehend. The courthouse clock chimed 10, its bronze voice carrying across the muddy streets of Cedar Falls like a funeral bell. I pressed my back against the cold stone wall, watching the morning bustle of townsfolk who had homes to return to, debts that didn't consume their sleep, futures that stretched beyond next week. My shawl, once blue as summer sky but now faded to the color of winter clouds, pulled tight around shoulders that had grown thin during the harsh months since Thomas died. Mrs. Whitlow? The voice belonged to Jeremiah Pike, the bank clerk whose soft hands had never known honest work, but whose ledger books held the power to destroy lives. His spectacles caught the morning light as he approached, document folder tucked under his arm like a weapon. "I trust you received our final notice?" I straightened, drawing on reserves of dignity I wasn't certain I possessed. "I did." "And the payment?" "The full amount comes to $437, including interest and fees." His voice carried the practiced sympathy of a man who'd delivered such news before, who'd perfected the art of sounding regretful while wielding financial ruin. $437. He might as well have asked me to fly to the moon. The coins in my reticule, carefully counted that morning, totaled $3.18. "Mr. Pike, I wonder if we might discuss terms. Perhaps a partial payment, with the remainder." "Mrs. Whitlow." Pike's interruption was gentle but final. "The bank has been more than patient. Your husband's debts have been outstanding for 8 months. We simply cannot extend further credit." He consulted his pocket watch with the air of a man whose schedule mattered more than human suffering. "The auction will proceed as scheduled." I watched him disappear into the courthouse, his polished shoes clicking against the stone steps with the rhythm of a ticking clock. Around me, the town continued its daily business. Mrs. Henry emerged from the mercantile with her weekly supplies. The blacksmith's hammer rang against the anvil in steady, reassuring beats. Children chased hoops down the boardwalk, their laughter bright as birdsong. Life flowed around me like water around a stone, indifferent to my drowning. I'd already tried everything. The Ladies' Aid Society had offered prayers and 1 casserole. The minister had spoken of God's mysterious ways, while offering no earthly solution. Even my sister in Kansas City had written back with regrets and empty hands, her own husband's business struggling in these hard times. I stood alone in a world that had no place for widowed women without means, without family, without hope. The job posting tacked to the courthouse bulletin board caught my eye as I turned to leave. Most of the notices were typical fare: harvesting work, seamstress positions, housekeeping for respectable families. But one stood apart, written in bold black ink on expensive paper. Housekeeper wanted. Isolated ranch. Difficult conditions. Experience with hardship essential. Fair wage for capable woman. Inquire J. McReady, Bar M Ranch, Devil's Creek. Devil's Creek lay 20 miles west of Cedar Falls, deep in country where civilization thinned to scattered homesteads and the law belonged to whoever could enforce it. I had heard whispers about the McReady spread, stories told in hushed tones at church socials and sewing circles. James McReady was said to be a hard man, brutal to his hired hands, impossible to please. 2 housekeepers had left his employ in the past year, both refusing to speak of their experiences beyond warning other women away. But the posting mentioned fair wage, and fair might mean enough to save the farm. I carefully removed the notice, ignoring the disapproving stare of Mrs. Carlyle, whose husband owned the largest store in town and whose opinion carried weight in all matters social and moral. "Clara Whitlow, you cannot be seriously considering that position." Mrs. Carlyle's voice carried the authority of a woman who'd never known want. "McReady's reputation is, well, it's hardly suitable for a Christian woman." "Mrs. Carlyle, I appreciate your concern. I folded the notice with deliberate care. But I find myself in circumstances that require immediate action. There are other ways. Charitable positions. The church could arrange something more appropriate. Mrs. Carlyle's tone suggested she was conferring a great favor by acknowledging my existence at all. A woman of your situation should be more careful about the associations she forms. The casual cruelty of it struck me like a physical blow. Your situation. As if widowhood and poverty were moral failings rather than misfortunes that could befall any woman. Thank you for your guidance, Mrs. Carlyle. I'll give it all the consideration it deserves. The 20-mile ride to Devil's Creek stretched before me like a journey into another world. I'd sold my wedding ring to hire the wagon and driver, each mile taking me further from everything familiar and deeper into country where hope and desperation wore the same face. The driver, a weather-beaten man named Hutchins, spoke little but cast frequent glances at his passenger, as if trying to understand what would drive a respectable woman to seek employment at the McReady ranch. "You sure about this, ma'am?" he asked as we crested a hill that revealed the sprawling valley below. "I can turn around right now. No shame in changing your mind." But I was staring at the ranch spread below us, and shame had become a luxury I couldn't afford. The Bar M stretched across the valley floor like a small town, its buildings arranged with military precision around a central courtyard. The main house rose 2 stories of solid timber and stone, built to withstand whatever this harsh country could deliver. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the landscape in orderly rows, while cattle grazed on grass that had already begun to green with spring rain. It was, I realized, beautiful in its own stark way. Functional beauty, born of necessity and maintained by will. No Eastern architect had designed these buildings. They'd grown from the land itself, shaped by wind and weather and the demands of survival. This was civilization carved from wilderness by human determination, and despite my fear, I felt a stirring of something I hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. The ranch hands paused in their work as the wagon approached, their faces revealing the same curiosity that had marked every face in Cedar Falls. But their attention carried different weight here. These were men accustomed to violence, to settling disputes with their hands rather than lawyers. Their assessment of me wasn't social but practical. Was I strong enough for this life, or would I become another burden for their already demanding boss? James McReady emerged from the main house as Hutchins pulled the wagon to a stop. My first impression was of controlled power barely contained within a civilized frame. He stood perhaps 6 feet tall, with shoulders broadened by years of physical labor and hands that bore the scars of honest work. His dark hair showed threads of silver at the temples, and his eyes held the wariness of a man who'd learned that trust was a luxury that could prove fatal. But it was his stillness that struck me most forcefully. While other men might pace or fidget, McReady possessed the absolute stillness of a predator at rest. He studied me with the same thoroughness his hands might show in examining a horse for purchase, missing nothing and revealing nothing of his conclusions. "Mrs. Whitlow, I presume." His voice carried the slight burr of Scottish heritage, softened by years in American frontier but never entirely abandoned. "You're smaller than I expected." I climbed down from the wagon with as much dignity as my circumstances allowed. "Mr. McReady, I believe you'll find that size and capability aren't always correlated." Something flickered in his eyes that might have been amusement. "We'll see about that. Hutchins, see that Mrs. Whitlow's trunk reaches the house. I'll settle with you before you head back." The wagon pulled away, taking with it my last connection to the world I'd known. I stood in the ranch courtyard with my worldly possessions reduced to a single trunk and my future dependent on the judgment of a man whose reputation preceded him like thunder before lightning. McReady gestured toward the house.
"Come.
We'll discuss terms." The interior of the main house surprised me with its unexpected comfort. Heavy wooden furniture showed the craftsmanship of someone who understood both beauty and durability. Books lined one wall of the main room, their leather bindings suggesting an owner who valued learning. A stone fireplace dominated the far wall, its hearth large enough to warm the entire space during winter's assault. But it was the silence that struck me most forcefully. This was a house built for family, with rooms designed for children's laughter and women's conversation. Instead, it held only the echoing emptiness of a man who'd chosen isolation over companionship. Sit. McReady indicated a chair before settling himself behind a desk that had seen years of hard use. I'll be direct, Mrs. Whitlow. I need a housekeeper who can manage this place without constant supervision. Someone who won't run at the first sign of difficulty or spend her time gossiping with the hands about my business. I met his gaze steadily. And I need employment that pays enough to meet my obligations. I understand you've had difficulty keeping help. 2 women in 8 months. His admission was matter-of-fact, without apology. Both found the work too demanding. This isn't a position for someone seeking easy wages or pleasant company. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles away. The nearest town is Cedar Falls, which you've already left behind. If you can't handle isolation, you'd best speak now. Mr. McReady, I've just lost my home, my husband, and everything I'd built over 15 years of marriage. I'm not afraid of isolation. I'm afraid of poverty and dependence on others' charity. The words emerged with more honesty than I'd intended, but something in his manner demanded directness. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with renewed interest. Your husband died recently? Last autumn. Fever took him before the doctor could arrive. The grief still caught me unexpectedly, but I'd learned to speak around it. He left debts I didn't know about. The farm goes to auction in 3 days unless I can raise $400. 400. McReady was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the desktop in a rhythm I couldn't interpret. That's specific. 437, to be exact. I straightened my shoulders. I'm not asking for charity, Mr. McReady. I'm asking for work that pays enough to solve my problems. The position pays $40 a month, plus room and board. His response was immediate, as if he'd already calculated my worth and circumstances. 6 days a week, with Sunday afternoons free. Cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatever else needs doing. You'll have your own room and access to the kitchen for personal needs. $40 a month. More than I dared hope. Enough to save the farm if I could manage the work. But there had to be conditions, reasons why other women had fled this apparent paradise. What are you telling me about the difficulties I should expect? McReady's smile held no warmth. I work my stock hard, and I work my people harder. I don't tolerate laziness, dishonesty, or interference in matters that don't concern you. Some find my expectations unreasonable, and some find your methods questionable. The silence stretched between us like a drawn blade. When McReady finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who'd made hard choices and lived with their consequences. Mrs. Whitlow, I've built this ranch from nothing in country that kills the weak and destroys the foolish. I've done things that would shock the ladies of Cedar Falls and made decisions that keep me awake at night. But I've never broken my word to someone who worked honestly for me, and I've never failed to protect what's mine. The emphasis on mine wasn't lost on me. By accepting this position, I would become his responsibility, subject to his protection and his authority. In a world where women's choices were limited by law and custom, I was choosing to place myself under the control of a man whose reputation suggested that control would be absolute. I accept your terms, Mr. McReady. He nodded once, as if my decision had been foregone. Maria will show you to your room and explain your duties. Supper is at 6. We keep early hours here. Maria proved to be a woman of perhaps 50 years, with silver threading through black hair and hands that spoke of a lifetime's honest labor. Her English carried the musical cadence of Spanish, and her manner suggested someone who'd learned to judge quickly and accurately. She led me through the house with efficient steps, pointing out essentials with economic words. Senor McReady, he is not cruel, but he is not easy. Maria's voice carried decades of experience with difficult men. He pays fair, he protects his people, but he expects much. The other women, they expected different kind of work. Easier work. My room occupied the house's second floor, with windows facing east toward the mountains and furnishings that, while simple, exceeded anything I'd known in my married life. A bed with clean linens, a washstand with pitcher and basin, a wardrobe large enough for the few dresses I possessed. After months of uncertainty, the simple comfort of a space that belonged to me alone nearly overwhelmed my composure. This is more than I expected. Senor McReady, he believes people work better when they are treated like people, not animals. Maria studied me with dark eyes that missed nothing. You have had hard times. It wasn't a question. My circumstances were written in my worn dress, my too-thin frame, the careful way I handled my few possessions as if they were precious. Yes. But I hope those times are ending. Maybe. That depends on you. Maria moved toward the door, then paused. Senora, the other women who came here, they thought this work would be like working in a townhouse. Clean floor, dust furniture, cook simple food. This is ranch work. Hard work. You understand. I understood. I'd managed a farm household for 15 years, wrestled with wood stoves and stubborn wells, preserved meat and vegetables against winter's hunger, sewn and mended, and made do with whatever materials I could find. Ranch work might be harder, but it wouldn't be foreign. I understand, Maria. I'm not afraid of hard work. The older woman nodded approval. Bueno. Supper in 1 hour. Senor McReady, he does not like to wait. Alone in my room, I unpacked my trunk with methodical care. 3 dresses, 1 for work and 2 for church and town visits I might never make again. Undergarments mended so many times they were more patches than original fabric. A few books that had been my mother's, their pages yellow with age, but their wisdom undimmed. A small wooden box containing my most precious possessions, Thomas's letters from our courtship, a pressed flower from our wedding bouquet, a photograph of us taken the first year of our marriage, when the future had seemed bright with promise. I set the photograph on the small table beside my bed, then immediately put it away again. This new life would require all my strength and attention. I couldn't afford to be haunted by what I'd lost. The kitchen revealed the true scope of my responsibilities. Unlike the comfortable main rooms, this workspace was designed for efficiency rather than comfort. A massive stove dominated one wall, its iron surface scarred by years of constant use. Shelves lined the walls, holding everything from basic provisions to specialized tools I didn't recognize. A pantry larger than my old bedroom held stores sufficient to feed a small army, which, I realized, was essentially what the ranch represented. Maria worked at the stove with practiced efficiency, preparing what appeared to be enough food for a dozen men. The hands, they eat like bears. Always hungry, always wanting more. She gestured toward a pot that could have served my entire household for a week. You will learn the amounts. Takes time. I tied my apron and rolled up my sleeves. What can I do to help? For the first time, Maria smiled. You can set the table in the dining room. Senor McReady, he eats there. The hands eat in the bunkhouse, but we send food to them. The dining room continued the house's theme of austere comfort. A long table that could seat 8, though only 2 places were set. Windows faced west, offering a view of the working corrals where men moved among cattle with purpose and efficiency. It was a working ranch, I realized, not some gentleman's hobby farm. Every element served a function. Every detail reflected the demands of survival in harsh country. McReady appeared precisely at 6, his work clothes exchanged for clean shirt and trousers that, while practical, showed quality in their cut and fabric. He took his place at the table's head without ceremony, his presence filling the room like a force of nature barely contained within civilized walls. Maria tells me you offer to help with supper. His tone revealed nothing of his opinion on this development. I thought it would be helpful to learn my duties as quickly as possible. I served the meal with steady hands, despite being acutely aware of his scrutiny. I've managed a household before, though not on this scale. The scale is the least of it. McReady accepted his plate with a nod that might have been thanks. We're 30 miles from the nearest doctor, 20 from law enforcement, and 50 from anything resembling civilized help. When trouble comes, we handle it ourselves. The implication was clear. This wasn't just isolated. It was beyond the reach of conventional protection. Whatever happened here would be resolved by whoever had the strength and will to impose their solution. What kind of trouble should I expect? McReady's smile held no humor. The kind that makes other women pack their bags and leave in the middle of the night. I met his gaze steadily. Mr. McReady, I've already lost everything I thought mattered. I'm not easily frightened. We'll see, Mrs. Whitlow. We'll see. The meal continued in relative silence, broken only by practical observations about ranch routine and household management. McReady ate with the methodical efficiency of a man who viewed food as fuel rather than pleasure, but I noticed his appreciation for Maria's cooking in the way he cleaned his plate and accepted a second helping of beef stew. As I cleared the table, I found myself studying my new employer with the same attention I'd once given to weather signs and crop conditions. McReady was a man of contradictions, brutally practical yet surrounding himself with well-made possessions, reportedly harsh yet speaking respectfully to his housekeeper, isolated by choice yet maintaining a home designed for family. Understanding these contradictions might be the key to surviving in his employment. Mrs. Whitlow. His voice caught my attention as I stacked dishes. You'll find this different from town life. Out here, we depend on each other absolutely. Betrayal of that trust isn't just disappointing, it's dangerous. I paused in my work. Are you warning me about something specific or speaking in general terms? Both. McReady pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against wooden floor. Good night, Mrs. Whitlow. I'll expect breakfast at 5:30. 5:30. I calculated the hours of sleep I'd manage, the time required to learn Maria's routines, the adjustment to a schedule built around ranch work rather than my own convenience. But I'd made my choice, traded my familiar misery for unfamiliar possibility. Tomorrow would bring the first test of whether I possessed the strength to rebuild my life from scratch. Outside my window, darkness had settled over the valley like a blanket, broken only by the warm glow from the bunkhouse where the ranch hands were settling in for the night. Somewhere in that darkness lay my future, whatever shape it might take. I knelt beside my bed and offered the first prayer I'd made with genuine hope in months. Lord, I don't ask for easy, just possible. Help me be strong enough for whatever comes. In the morning, I would discover just how much strength this new life would demand. The summer sun beat down on the ranch yard with relentless intensity as I pumped water from the deep well, my sleeves rolled up and my hair damp with perspiration. 2 months at the bar had transformed me from the desperate widow who'd arrived in spring to someone I barely recognized in the looking glass. My hands, once soft from town living, now bore the calluses of honest work. My frame, thin from grief and poverty, had filled out under Maria's careful feeding and the demands of ranch labor. Señora Clara, young Miguel Santos came running from the horse corral, his face bright with excitement. Come see. Papa says the mare is ready. I set down my bucket and followed the boy across the dusty yard to where his father, Carlos, worked with a pregnant mare that had been laboring since dawn. Carlos Santos managed McReady's horse breeding operation with the skill of a man born to the work, and his wife Esperanza served as the closest thing to a midwife the isolated ranch possessed. Is everything well? I asked, though the answer was written in Carlos's relieved smile. See, very well. A colt, strong and healthy. He gestured toward the stall where the new mother stood on unsteady legs, her foal already attempting to nurse. Señor McReady, he will be pleased. This bloodline, it is valuable. I had learned to read the rhythms of ranch life, to understand how each successful birth, each healthy calf, each good harvest contributed to the prosperity that kept us all fed and sheltered. The bar wasn't just McReady's empire. It was home and livelihood for 24 souls who'd found refuge in this remote valley. Miguel, run tell your mother the good news. She's been worrying all morning. I watched the boy dash away, his energy undimmed by the heat that left grown men seeking shade. At 8 years old, he was already learning the skills that would make him a capable ranch hand, but his childhood hadn't been sacrificed to necessity. McReady, despite his reputation for harshness, had proven surprisingly tolerant of children's laughter and games. Mrs. Whitlow. The voice belonged to my employer, who approached from the direction of the cattle pens where he'd been working since before sunrise. His shirt clung to his frame with honest sweat, and dust coated his boots and hat brim. 2 months of daily observation had taught me to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the pace of his walk, the degree of tension around his eyes. Today he seemed pleased, which meant the morning's work had gone well. Carlos tells me we have a new colt. A fine one from what I can see. Carlos seems very satisfied with the bloodline. I fell into step beside him as we walked toward the house, a routine that had developed gradually as I'd proven my competence and earned his grudging respect. Good. We need the breeding stock to stay strong. McReady paused at the well to splash water over his face and neck, the simple gesture somehow intimate in its unself-consciousness. Any word from town? The weekly mail run had become one of my unofficial responsibilities, as I was the only woman on the ranch who read fluently and could handle correspondence with suppliers and buyers. Henry's has the supplies you ordered. They'll deliver Thursday. And there's a letter from that cattle buyer in Kansas City. McReady accepted the letter I produced from my apron pocket, his fingers briefly brushing mine in a contact that sent an unexpected warmth up my arm. Such moments had become more frequent lately, small touches and glances that seemed to carry meaning beyond their practical purpose. Good news? I asked as he read. Maybe. He's interested in taking 500 head in the fall, but the price. McReady shook his head. Not enough to cover what we need for winter preparations. I had learned enough about ranch economics to understand the problem. Every decision balanced immediate needs against future survival, profit against prudence, growth against security. McReady carried the weight of all those calculations, responsible not just for his own prosperity, but for the welfare of every family who depended on the Bar M. Perhaps there are other buyers? Perhaps. His tone suggested he'd already considered and rejected several possibilities. We'll manage. We always do. The quiet confidence in those words spoke to something deeper than mere optimism. McReady had built this ranch through sheer determination, transforming raw wilderness into productive land through years of backbreaking labor and careful planning. He'd earned the right to believe in his ability to overcome whatever challenges arose. Inside the house, the afternoon heat made even simple tasks feel overwhelming. I moved through my routines with practiced efficiency, preparing the evening meal while monitoring bread rising in the pantry and keeping one eye on the laundry hanging on lines behind the house. The work was endless and demanding, but it was also satisfying in ways my previous life had never been. Señora Clara? Esperanza Santos appeared in the kitchen doorway, her dark eyes troubled. You have a moment? I set down my mixing spoon and gave the woman my full attention. Esperanza rarely sought private conversation, preferring to handle family matters within the close-knit community of Mexican families who worked the ranch. When she did speak, it was usually about something serious. Of course. What troubles you? My sister, she lives in Cedar Falls. She writes. Esperanza hesitated, glancing around as if ensuring we wouldn't be overheard. She says there are men asking questions about Señor McReady, about the ranch. A chill ran down my spine despite the afternoon heat. What kind of questions? About his business. About who works here. About. Esperanza's voice dropped to a whisper. About whether he has money hidden. I had heard whispers in town during my few visits, speculation about McReady's wealth and the source of his success. Some claimed he'd made his fortune through cattle rustling or worse. Others suggested he'd discovered gold on his property. All agreed that a man who lived so far from civilization and kept so much to himself must be hiding something valuable. Has anyone approached the ranch directly? Not yet. But my sister, she thinks they will come. She says these men, they are not the type to give up easily. Esperanza's hands twisted in her apron, betraying her anxiety. Señora, what should we do? I considered the question carefully. McReady's authority was absolute on ranch matters, but this felt different, more personal. These weren't business decisions or work assignments. They were threats to the safety of everyone who lived here. We should tell Señor McReady. He needs to know. See, but... Esperanza glanced toward the door again. He will be angry. Not at us, but at the situation. And when he is angry, I understood. McReady's temper, while never directed at his workers, could be a terrible thing to witness. I'd seen him reduce grown men to stammering apologies with nothing more than a cold stare and carefully chosen words. His protection came with the promise of swift and decisive action against threats, but that same decisiveness could be frightening even when directed at enemies rather than friends. I'll speak with him, I decided. Tonight, after supper. Esperanza's relief was visible. Gracias, señora. He listens to you differently than to us. The observation surprised me. I'd noticed that McReady seemed more relaxed in my presence, more willing to engage in conversation that went beyond immediate necessities. But I hadn't realized others had observed the change. What do you mean? With us, he is the patron. Fair but distant. With you? Esperanza smiled slightly. With you, he is more like a man and less like a boss. I felt heat rise in my cheeks that had nothing to do with kitchen work. The idea that my growing comfort with McReady might be visible to others was both thrilling and terrifying. I'd begun to look forward to our daily conversations, to the moments when his guard dropped and I glimpsed the man beneath the harsh exterior. But I hadn't considered that others might interpret those interactions as anything beyond professional courtesy. Esperanza, I hope you're not suggesting. Señora, I suggest nothing. I observe only that two people who work well together, who respect each other, sometimes find. The older woman shrugged eloquently. Sometimes find that respect becomes something more. Before I could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew our attention to the window. A lone rider approached from the direction of Cedar Falls, his horse lathered with sweat and his posture suggesting urgent business. I recognized Deputy Marshal Frank Malone, a decent man caught between his duty to uphold the law and his understanding that frontier justice sometimes required flexibility. Trouble, Esperanza whispered. I was already moving toward the door, wiping my hands on my apron as I stepped into the yard. McReady emerged from the barn at the same moment, his expression hardening as he recognized our visitor. Malone. McReady's greeting was neutral, revealing nothing of his thoughts. What brings you out here in this heat? The deputy dismounted slowly, his movements those of a man who'd been riding hard for hours. James, we need to talk. Inside, if you don't mind. Mrs. Whitlow, bring us something cold to drink, McReady instructed, but his tone carried an undercurrent that suggested I should find reasons to linger nearby. In the house's main room, Malone accepted a glass of cool water with grateful thanks before settling into the chair McReady indicated. I busied myself with unnecessary tasks that kept me within earshot, sensing that whatever news the deputy carried would affect me as much as my employer. James, I'll be direct. There are men in town asking questions about you, about this place. Malone's voice carried the weariness of a man delivering bad news he'd rather avoid. They claim to represent some Eastern investment company, but you don't believe them. Do you? When was the last time legitimate businessmen carried the kind of hardware these fellows are sporting? When did Eastern investors travel in groups of 6, all armed and all looking like they'd be more comfortable in a saloon than a boardroom? McReady was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against his chair arm in the rhythm I had learned to associate with careful thinking. What kind of questions? Everything. Your business practices, your workers, your domestic arrangements. Malone glanced meaningfully toward the kitchen where I continued my busy work. They seem particularly interested in whether you keep large amounts of cash on the property. And what did you tell them? Nothing useful. But James, I can't control what others might say. Some folks in town. Well, they don't have much love for you. They might be willing to share whatever gossip they think these men want to hear. My blood chilled as I understood the implications. If these strangers were indeed criminals rather than legitimate businessmen, they might be planning some kind of robbery or raid on the ranch. Worse, if they believed McReady kept significant wealth here, they might resort to violence to obtain it. How long do I have? McReady's question was matter-of-fact, as if he were asking about weather patterns rather than potential threats to his life and property. Hard to say. They're asking questions, not making immediate moves. But James. Malone leaned forward earnestly. These aren't the type of men who give up easily. If they decide you're worth their attention, they'll keep coming until they get what they want, or until someone stops them permanently. I see. McReady stood and moved to the window, gazing out at the ranch he'd built with his own hands. Frank, I appreciate the warning. But this is my land, my home. I won't be driven away by threats. I'm not asking you to leave. I'm asking you to be careful. Maybe send your people to town for a while. Reduce the number of potential complications. My heart clenched at the suggestion. The families who worked the bar had nowhere else to go, no other employment that would provide the security and stability McReady offered. Sending them away would scatter a community that had taken years to build, might destroy relationships and trust that couldn't easily be reconstructed.
No.
McReady's response was immediate and final. These people depend on me, and I depend on them. We don't abandon each other because of threats from strangers. Malone sighed heavily. I was afraid you'd say that. James, if trouble comes, you can't count on help from town. The sheriff's got his hands full with cattle thieves up north, and I'm just one man. You'll be on your own. Frank, I've been on my own since I came to this country. Nothing's changed except now I have people worth protecting. After Malone departed, I found myself alone with McReady in the sudden quiet of evening. The ranch hands had finished their work and retired to the bunkhouse. Families had gathered around their own tables, and the vast sky was beginning to show its first stars. Mr. McReady. My voice seemed loud in the peaceful stillness. Esperanza told me her sister had heard similar rumors in town. Men asking questions. I'm not surprised. McReady settled onto the front porch steps, gesturing for me to join him. I've been expecting something like this for a while. I sat carefully beside him, conscious of the impropriety, but more concerned with understanding the danger we all faced.
Why?
What makes you such a target? McReady was quiet for so long that I began to think he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old decisions and their consequences. Mrs. Whitlow, I came to this country with nothing. No family, no money, no prospects beyond what I could create with my own hands. In 15 years, I've built all this. He gestured toward the ranch spread below us. Some people can't accept that honest work and careful planning could accomplish so much. They prefer to believe there's some secret, some hidden wealth or illegal activity that explains my success. And is there? The question slipped out before I could stop myself, and I immediately regretted its boldness. But McReady didn't seem offended by my directness. Mrs. Whitlow, everything I own came from cattle sales, horse breeding, and careful investment of profits. I've never stolen, never cheated, never taken what wasn't freely given. But I've also never felt obligated to explain myself to people whose only accomplishment is inheriting what their fathers built. I heard the bitterness beneath his words, the frustration of a man who'd earned his place through merit but would always be viewed with suspicion by those who'd been handed their advantages. But these men Malone mentioned, they're not interested in your reputation. They want something tangible.
Yes.
And they'll keep looking until they're convinced there's nothing to find, or until someone convinces them that looking here is dangerous to their health. The casual way he spoke of violence sent a chill through me, even as I recognized the practical necessity behind his words. This was frontier country, where survival often depended on the willingness to fight for what you'd built. McReady had proven his ability to protect his property and people, but at what cost to his soul? Mr. McReady, if there's trouble, what would you have us do? The families, I mean. Keep working, keep living, keep trusting that I'll handle whatever comes. His response was immediate, as if he'd already considered the question. Mrs. Whitlow, I've never failed to protect what's mine. I don't intend to start now. The emphasis on mine wasn't lost on me. Somewhere during my months at the bar I had become part of what McReady considered his responsibility to protect. The realization should have troubled me, but instead it filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt since Thomas died. And if the protection requires extreme measures? McReady turned to look at me directly, his eyes serious in the gathering darkness. Mrs. Whitlow, Are you asking if I'm capable of killing to protect this place and these people? I met his gaze steadily. Yes, I suppose I am. Then yes, I am. Does that frighten you? I considered the question honestly, weighing my growing feelings for this complex man against the harsh realities of our situation. It should, but somehow, it doesn't. Is that wrong of me? In this country, Mrs. Whitlow, survival and morality don't always align neatly. Sometimes good people have to do hard things to protect what matters. McReady's voice softened slightly. The fact that you understand that tells me you're stronger than those other women who came here expecting easy work and gentle treatment. We sat in comfortable silence as full darkness settled over the valley, each lost in private thoughts about the challenges ahead. I found myself studying McReady's profile in the starlight, noting the strong line of his jaw, the careful way he held himself even in repose. This was a man who'd learned that relaxation could be a luxury he couldn't afford, that constant vigilance was the price of the peace he'd carved from wilderness. Mrs. Whitlow. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. These months you've been here, you've proven yourself more capable than I expected, more valuable than I anticipated. My heart began beating faster at something in his tone. Thank you. This place has become important to me as well. Has it? McReady turned toward me again, and in the darkness I could feel rather than see his intense attention. Important enough to stay, even if circumstances become difficult? Mr. McReady, I have nowhere else to go. But more than that, I don't want to go anywhere else. This ranch, these people, this life, it's become home in a way I never expected. Even though you know what I might have to do to keep it safe? I reached out almost without conscious thought, my hand covering his where it rested on the step between us. Especially because I know what you'll do to keep it safe. His hand turned beneath mine, our fingers interlacing in a gesture that felt like a promise. We stayed that way for a long moment, connected by touch and shared understanding, while the night sounds of the ranch surrounded us with familiar comfort. Clara. My name on his lips sounded different than it ever had before, intimate and careful. I need you to know that whatever happens, whatever I have to do, it's to protect something that's become precious to me. I know, James. The use of his given name felt natural, right, as if we'd crossed some invisible threshold into new territory. I know, and I'm not afraid. In the distance, a coyote called to its pack, the sound wild and lonesome in the vast darkness. But here on the porch of the house James McReady had built, I felt safer than I had since Thomas died. Whatever threats might come from town or beyond, whatever violence might be required to meet them, I knew with absolute certainty that this man would protect what he'd claimed as his own. And somehow, without either of us speaking the words aloud, I'd become part of what he was prepared to fight for. October's first frost had painted the valley in shades of amber and crimson when the strangers finally came. I spotted them from the kitchen window as I prepared the morning meal, 6 riders approaching in the gray light of dawn like harbingers of the trouble that had been brewing for weeks. Their horses moved with the easy gait of animals accustomed to long travel, and their riders sat with the confidence of men who'd never met a problem they couldn't solve with violence. James, I called softly, knowing he'd already seen them from his position near the barn. The ranch had been on alert for 2 weeks, ever since word came that the mysterious businessmen had left Cedar Falls and were asking questions at ranches throughout the territory. Every hand knew his role, every family understood the plan, but seeing the threat materialize still sent ice through my veins. McReady emerged from the barn with deliberate calm, his movements betraying none of the tension I knew he felt. He wore his work clothes and carried himself like a man beginning another ordinary day, but I noticed the way his right hand stayed close to the gun at his hip, the careful positioning that would allow him to draw quickly if necessary. The lead rider, a man with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time in saloons than under open sky, raised his hand in greeting as the group approached. His smile was as calculated as a politician's, friendly on the surface, but cold in the eyes. Mr. McReady, I presume? I'm Bradley Hutchinson, representing the Colorado Mining and Investment Company. The The man's voice carried the educated accent of eastern cities, but his clothes showed the wear of hard travel and his companions looked like hired guns rather than business associates. We'd like a few minutes of your time to discuss a proposition that could be quite profitable for both parties. Mr. Hutchinson. McReady's tone was neutral, revealing nothing of his thoughts. It's early for business calls. Perhaps you'd prefer to return after you've had time to clean up and rest. The suggestion was polite but pointed, a subtle reminder that civilized men didn't conduct business while trail dirty and heavily armed. Hutchinson's smile tightened almost imperceptibly, the first break in his careful facade. We prefer to handle our affairs promptly, Mr. McReady. Time is money, as they say. Hutchinson dismounted with practiced ease, his companions following suit in movements that seemed casual but positioned them strategically around the ranch yard. We understand you've built quite an operation here. Impressive work for a man starting from nothing. I watched from the kitchen window as several ranch hands emerged from various buildings, their own positioning equally strategic but less obvious. Carlos Santos appeared from the horse corral, while two other men began working near the main barn with tools that could serve as weapons if needed. The choreography was subtle but unmistakable to anyone who understood the language of potential violence. I appreciate the compliment, Mr. Hutchinson. But I'm curious what brings mining and investment men to a cattle ranch. McReady's voice carried just enough skepticism to make his doubt clear without crossing into open accusation. Diversification, Mr. McReady. Smart investors look beyond traditional opportunities. Hutchinson pulled a leather folder from his saddlebags, his movements causing his coat to fall open and reveal the pistol beneath. We've heard remarkable things about your success here, about the profits you've generated from this land. We'd like to make you an offer that would allow you to retire comfortably while we take over the burden of managing such a large operation. The offer was smooth and practiced, delivered with the confidence of men who'd made similar propositions before. But I noticed how Hutchinson's companions had spread out further, how their hands stayed close to their weapons, how their eyes constantly scanned for threats or opportunities. That's generous, Mr. Hutchinson, but I'm not interested in selling. This ranch isn't just a business investment, it's my home. McReady's response was polite but firm, the tone of a man who'd already made his decision and wouldn't be swayed by further argument. Perhaps you should consider our offer before declining so quickly. Hutchinson opened his folder with deliberate ceremony, withdrawing a document that looked official and impressive. We're prepared to pay $20,000 for the property, including all livestock and equipment. That's more than generous for a ranch this remote. $20,000. Even from my position in the kitchen, I could see McReady's careful stillness at the mention of such a sum. It was more money than most men saw in a lifetime, enough to buy a fine house in any city and live comfortably without ever working again. For a moment, I felt a stab of fear that he might actually consider the offer. Mr. Hutchinson, even if I were interested in selling, $20,000 wouldn't begin to cover the value of what I've built here. McReady's voice remained steady, but I caught the subtle shift that meant his patience was wearing thin. The land alone is worth more than that, not counting livestock, buildings, and equipment. But you're forgetting the complications of owning property this far from civilization. Hutchinson's smile turned predatory, the mask finally slipping to reveal the threat beneath. Accidents happen in remote areas. Buildings burn, livestock disappear, people get hurt. Insurance becomes quite expensive when you're responsible for so many vulnerable individuals. The threat was clear now, delivered with the casual confidence of men who'd used intimidation successfully before. My hands clenched into fists as I watched McReady's shoulders square almost imperceptibly, his body language shifting from cautious politeness to barely controlled danger. Mr. Hutchinson, I think you've misunderstood something fundamental about this situation. McReady's voice dropped to the quiet tone I had learned to associate with imminent violence. The people here aren't vulnerable. They're protected. And the man responsible for that protection doesn't respond well to threats. Hutchinson's companions shifted restlessly, hands moving closer to weapons as they sensed the change in atmosphere. But their leader pressed forward, either too confident or too committed to recognize the warning signs. Mr. McReady, we're not making threats. We're simply pointing out realities. A man in your position, with so many responsibilities, so many people depending on him. Well, such a man might find it difficult to sleep peacefully knowing that accidents could happen at any time. You're right about one thing, Mr. Hutchinson. McReady's hand moved in a gesture so subtle I almost missed it, but I knew every ranch hand would recognize the signal. I do have responsibilities. And one of them is making sure men who threaten my people understand the consequences of their choices. The ranch yard erupted into sudden, violent motion. McReady's gun appeared in his hand with deadly speed, while Carlos and the other hands emerged from their positions with rifles already aimed at the intruders. Hutchinson's companions reached for their weapons, but found themselves facing superior numbers in unfavorable positions. Gentlemen, I suggest you keep your hands where I can see them. McReady's voice cut through the tension like a blade, calm and absolutely certain. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and a long way from any help that might care about your welfare. Hutchinson raised his hands slowly, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. Mr. McReady, you're making a serious mistake. We represent powerful interests, people who don't forget insults or injuries. Mr. Hutchinson, you came to my home, threatened my people, and attempted to steal my property through intimidation. The only mistake would be allowing you to leave here with the impression that such behavior is acceptable. McReady stepped closer, his gun never wavering. Carlos, collect their weapons. I watched from the window as the ranch hands efficiently disarmed the intruders, finding an impressive arsenal of concealed weapons that confirmed their true nature. These weren't businessmen or investors. They were criminals who'd planned to take the ranch through violence if intimidation failed. You'll find your horses are now carrying supplies for a long journey, McReady continued conversationally. Food, water, and a map showing the quickest route to the territorial border. I suggest you use them. This isn't over, McReady. Hutchinson's mask had completely fallen away, revealing the vicious thug beneath the polished exterior. You can't watch everywhere, protect everyone. We'll be back. Mr. Hutchinson, if you or any of your associates are seen in this territory again, you won't live long enough to regret the decision. McReady's tone remained calm, but the promise in his words was unmistakable. I suggest you find easier prey. I held my breath as the confrontation reached its climax, 6 dangerous men facing the choice between retreat and a fight they couldn't win. For a moment, violence hung in the air like morning mist, ready to explode into deadly action at the slightest provocation. Then Hutchinson stepped back, his hands still raised but his eyes burning with frustrated rage. We'll remember this, McReady. Every slight, every humiliation. And when we come back, we'll bring enough men to settle all accounts. I'll be waiting. McReady's response was simple and final, the words of a man who'd faced such threats before and survived them all. I watched the strangers mount their horses and ride away, their retreat swift, but not quite hurried enough to suggest panic. These were dangerous men who would indeed remember this encounter, would indeed return if given the opportunity. But for now, the immediate threat had passed. As the dust settled in the ranch yard, I emerged from the house to find McReady standing exactly where the confrontation had occurred, his gun still in his hand but pointed at the ground. The ranch hands were dispersing to their regular duties, but their movement carried the heightened alertness of men who knew the danger hadn't truly passed. James. My voice seemed loud in the sudden quiet. Are you all right? He turned toward me, and I saw something in his expression I'd never witnessed before. Not fear, but a kind of weary sadness, as if the confrontation had cost him something precious even in victory. I'm fine, Clara. But this isn't finished. They'll be back, probably with more men and a better plan. He holstered his weapon with practiced efficiency. I need to send word to other ranchers, warn them about what's coming. And we need to prepare for a longer siege. What can I do? McReady studied my face for a long moment, as if weighing some important decision. Clara, I need you to understand something. What's coming won't be like today's confrontation. These men will try to hurt the people I care about, use them as leverage against me. You've become someone they might target. The implication was clear. By caring for me, by allowing me to become important to him, McReady had made me a potential weapon to be used against him. The knowledge should have terrified me, but instead I felt a fierce surge of determination. James, I won't be driven away by threats from criminals. This is my home now, these are my people. If they want to use me against you, they'll find I'm not as helpless as they imagine. Something flickered in McReady's eyes that might have been pride. Clara, I was hoping you'd say that. But I need to know you understand what you're choosing. These men will kill without hesitation if it serves their purposes. And you'll kill without hesitation to protect what's yours. I stepped closer, my hand finding his arm in a gesture that felt natural and right. James, I've watched you build something beautiful here, something worth protecting. I won't let strangers destroy it because they're too lazy and vicious to build something of their own. McReady's hand covered mine, his touch warm and reassuring despite the calluses earned through years of hard work. Clara, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said before now. What is it? These months you've been here, watching you work, seeing how you care for this place and these people, I've come to realize that what I feel for you goes beyond gratitude or professional respect. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the emotion beneath his words. I love you, Clara, and that love makes you a target for anyone who wants to hurt me. The declaration, delivered with typical McReady directness, sent warmth flooding through my chest. I'd hoped, dreamed, imagined that his growing attention meant something deeper, but hearing the words spoken aloud still took my breath away. James, I love you too. I think I have for weeks, but I was afraid to hope you might feel the same. My hand tightened on his arm. And if loving you makes me a target, then so be it. I'd rather face danger with you than safety without you. McReady pulled me into his arms then, holding me against his chest with fierce tenderness. I could feel his heart beating, strong and steady, a rhythm that promised protection and devotion for whatever trials lay ahead. Clara, when this is over, when we've dealt with these threats and secured our safety, will you marry me? The proposal was characteristic of the man, practical and direct, but delivered with emotion that couldn't be mistaken. I pulled back enough to look into his eyes, seeing there the love and determination that had built this ranch and would defend it against all comers. Yes, James. Whenever you think it's safe, whenever you're ready, yes. They might have stayed that way longer, but the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew our attention to a new group of riders. My heart jumped with fresh alarm until I recognized Deputy Marshal Malone leading a posse of men from town. James, Malone called as he dismounted. We saw those strangers riding hard toward the territorial border. Figured they might have paid you a visit. They did. Made me an offer I was happy to refuse. McReady's tone was deliberately casual, but I noticed he kept one arm around my waist, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the arriving lawmen. Any trouble? Malone's question carried the weight of a man who'd expected to find violence and was relieved to discover otherwise. Nothing we couldn't handle. But Frank, they'll be back with reinforcements. And they're not the type to give up easily. McReady's expression grew serious. This territory needs to know what we're facing. Malone nodded grimly. Already working on it. Words going out to every ranch and settlement within 50 miles. We're organizing a coordinated response, making sure these vultures understand they're not welcome anywhere in this country. I felt a surge of pride in the community that was rallying to protect one of their own. This was frontier justice at its finest, neighbors standing together against threats that no individual could face alone. What do you need from us? McReady asked. Keep doing what you're doing. Stay alert, stay armed, and don't hesitate to call for help if you need it. Malone's gaze shifted to me, his expression carefully neutral. Mrs. Whitlow, I hope you understand that your safety might be a concern in the coming weeks. Deputy Malone, I appreciate your concern, but my place is here. These people have become my family, and you don't abandon family when trouble comes. My voice carried conviction that surprised even me with its strength. Malone nodded approvingly. Yes, ma'am. I figured you'd say something like that. He turned back to McReady. James, if those strangers do come back, they'll likely try a night attack. They'll want to catch you off guard. Use darkness to even the odds. Let them come. We'll be ready. McReady's confidence was absolute, born of years defending what he'd built and the knowledge that his people would stand with him against any threat. As the posse prepared to leave, Malone approached me privately. Mrs. Whitlow, I meant what I said about your safety. But I also want you to know that James McReady is one of the finest men I've known. If you're thinking of making your arrangement here permanent, you could do a lot worse. I felt heat rise in my cheeks. Deputy Malone, I'm not sure what you mean by permanent arrangements. Ma'am, I've got eyes and I've been married for 20 years. I know what love looks like when I see it. Malone's smile was kind. Just wanted you to know that despite what some folks in town might say, James is a good man who deserves happiness. The weeks that followed tested every aspect of ranch life and community bonds. Reports came daily of strangers asking questions at neighboring spreads, of mysterious fires and missing livestock that suggested systematic intimidation. But the territory's response was swift and coordinated, with ranchers organizing patrols and sharing information that made it increasingly difficult for the criminals to operate safely. I threw myself into preparations with fierce determination. I organized the ranch women into teams for food preservation and medical supplies, taught the older children to reload rifles quickly, and worked with Maria to establish emergency procedures for protecting the youngest family members. Every task was performed with the knowledge that lives might depend on our thoroughness. The attack, when it finally came, arrived not as a dramatic nighttime assault, but as a series of probing actions designed to test the ranch's defenses and resolve. Small groups of riders appeared on distant ridges, watching and evaluating. Supplies disappeared from remote line shacks. Cattle were found with cut fences and missing brands. But McReady's response was equally methodical. He organized his men into rotating patrols that kept the ranch under constant surveillance. He reached out to neighboring ranchers, creating a network of mutual support that made isolated attacks impossible. Most importantly, he never allowed the pressure to drive him into hasty actions that might expose his people to greater danger. The crisis reached its climax on a cold November morning when smoke appeared on the horizon, followed by a rider whose horse was lathered with desperate speed. Tom Wilson from the Double Creek Ranch brought news that chilled every heart in the yard. James, they hit the Henrys last night. Burned the house, ran off the stock. Old man Henry's hurt bad, and his wife. Tom's voice broke. His wife didn't make it out. The news hit the assembled ranch families like a physical blow. The Henrys had been neighbors for 15 years, decent people who'd never harmed anyone. That criminals would murder an innocent woman for the sake of intimidation represented a level of evil that demanded immediate response. How many men did they have? McReady's voice was deadly calm, but I could see the fury building behind his controlled exterior. At least a dozen, maybe more. They knew exactly what they were doing, James. This wasn't random violence. It was a message meant for all of us. McReady turned to address his assembled people, his voice carrying to every corner of the yard. Friends, what happened to the Henrys proves these men won't stop with threats and intimidation. They're willing to kill innocent people to get what they want. That means we have to be willing to stop them permanently. Carlos Santos stepped forward, his weathered face grim with determination. Senor McReady, what do you need us to do? We're going to end this. Tonight. But I won't order any man to risk his life for my problems. Anyone who wants to take his family to town until this is settled can do so, with my blessing and full pay. The response was immediate and unanimous. Not a single hand moved toward the bunkhouse or spoke of leaving. These men had found home and purpose at the Bar M, had been treated with respect and fairness by an employer who valued their contributions. They would stand with him against whatever darkness approached. Then we ride at sunset. Carlos, organize the men into groups of 4. Tom, can you get word to the other ranchers? It's time to finish this. As the men dispersed to prepare weapons and plan strategy, I found myself alone with McReady for what might be the last time. The knowledge that he was riding into deadly danger, that some of these good men might not return, weighed on my heart like lead. James, I know you have to do this. But promise me you'll be careful, that you'll come back to me. McReady took my hands in his touch gentle despite the weapons he now carried. Clara, I promise I'll do everything in my power to come back to you. But if something happens, if I don't make it through this, I need you to know that loving you has been the best part of my life. Tears blurred my vision as I reached up to touch his face, memorizing the strong features that had become so dear to me. James McReady, you listen to me. You're going to come back because we have a wedding to plan and a life to build together. Don't you dare let those criminals take that away from us. He kissed me then, deep and desperate, and full of all the words we hadn't had time to say. When we finally separated, I could see my own determination reflected in his eyes. I love you, Clara Whitlow, and I'm going to marry you if I have to fight the devil himself to do it. The posse that rode out from the bar that evening represented more than just armed men seeking justice. It was a community defending its right to exist, neighbors protecting neighbors, civilization pushing back against those who would destroy it for personal gain. I watched them disappear into the gathering darkness and offered prayers for their safety and success. The wait was agony. I and the other women maintained normal routines as much as possible, but every heart jumped at unexpected sounds. Every eye strained toward the horizon for signs of returning riders. The children, sensing their elders' tension, stayed close to their mothers and spoke in whispers when they spoke at all. Dawn was painting the eastern sky with tentative light when I heard the sound I'd been praying for, hoofbeats approaching from the direction the posse had taken. I ran to the yard with the other women, my heart hammering with hope and fear in equal measure. McReady led the returning riders, his clothes torn and stained but his posture strong and confident. Behind him rode the surviving members of his force, some wounded but all alive. Carlos Santos sported a bandaged arm, and young Miguel bore a cut across his forehead, but their faces showed the satisfaction of men who'd completed necessary work. I threw myself into McReady's arms as he dismounted, feeling the solid reality of his survival wash over me like warm water. He held me tightly, his face buried in my hair, and I could feel the tremor in his hands that spoke of recent violence and its aftermath. "It's over," he whispered against my ear. "They won't be bothering anyone again." The details emerged slowly over the following days as wounded men healed and the territory's law enforcement investigated the scene of the final confrontation. Hutchinson and his gang had been trapped in a canyon where they'd planned to ambush individual ranchers, caught between the coordinated forces of honest men who'd had enough of their terror. Some of the criminals had died fighting. Others had been captured and would face territorial justice for their crimes. But the important thing was that the threat had been eliminated, the community had proven its ability to protect itself, and life could return to the peaceful rhythms that made frontier existence bearable. 2 weeks after the confrontation, McReady made good on his promise. The wedding was held in the ranch's main room, with Deputy Malone officiating and every member of the Bar M community in attendance. I wore my best dress, carefully mended and pressed for the occasion, while McReady had managed to find a proper suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and strong frame. As we spoke our vows before friends who'd become family, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months ago, I'd been a desperate widow facing the loss of everything I'd known. Now I was beginning a new life with a man who'd proven his devotion through words and actions, surrounded by a community that had accepted me as one of their own. Do you, Clara Whitlow, take James McReady to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. The words came easily, spoken with absolute conviction and joy. Do you, James McReady, take Clara Whitlow to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? I do. McReady's voice was strong and sure, his eyes never leaving my face. Then, by the power vested in me by the territory of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. James, you may kiss your bride. The kiss that sealed our union was gentle and reverent, full of promise for the life we would build together. Around us, The assembled community erupted in cheers and applause, celebrating not just a wedding but the triumph of love and determination over adversity and threat. As winter settled over the valley, transforming the ranch into a landscape of pristine beauty, I found myself reflecting on the wisdom of taking the job nobody wanted. I'd gained far more than employment and security. I'd found love, family, and a home worth defending. Standing at my kitchen window, watching my husband work with the horses he loved while Miguel Santos practiced his rope skills under Carlos's patient instruction, I offered a prayer of gratitude for the courage that had brought me to this remote valley and the strength that had seen me through its challenges. Outside, snow began to fall in gentle flakes that would soon cover the ranch in winter's protective blanket. Inside, the fire crackled warmly in the stone fireplace, while the aroma of fresh bread filled the air. This was home, bought with hardship and sacrifice but rich with love and community. James looked up from his work and caught me watching him, his smile bright enough to warm my heart despite the cold. He raised his hand in a small wave, a gesture that spoke of shared affection and the comfortable intimacy of married love. I waved back, then returned to my work with a heart full of contentment. I'd taken the job nobody wanted and discovered it was exactly the life I'd been meant to live.